It is Friday, April 6, 2018, and this is Seahawks Chats with Kenneth Arthur, where this week Seahawks Chats takes a left turn into LA for Rams Chats with Joe McAtee of Turf Show Times, the sister site to the Seahawks at SB Nation for the Rams. Of course, Joe McAtee, friend of the show, been on many times, and perhaps every time Joe has come on to the show, by no fault of his own, usually it's what could the Rams be doing better? What do the Rams need to do to get over the hump to reach the Seahawks and all this kind of stuff? And then last year, obviously, was a turn for good times for the Rams with the Sean McVay coming in as head coach, moving to LA, putting money into the team in a certain way to make them interesting and exciting, and then all of a sudden going 11-5, winning the NFC West, making the playoffs. But if that wasn't good enough, and apparently it wasn't, the Rams have had an offseason to remember, an offseason of the ages, in adding, let's see, Damakung Su, who I've never said that right, Brandon Cooks, Aqib Talib, Marcus Peters, probably some others. But the Rams have made huge moves for 2018. So we got to sit down and talk with Joe McAtee to discuss these moves, what they'll mean for the team in his opinion, and how they would even move on to 2019, what the long-term plan could be for the Rams. And Joe, I've listed out some of the things that they've done. But for you right now, looking at next season for the Rams and looking at last season, maybe with some of the problems that they had that prevented them from winning a playoff game and getting past the wild card round, which one move has you most excited for next season?
Man, that was a lot, Kenny.
I do that. I tend to do that.
That's all good. I probably should have told you this. I've been in a coma since July 2016.
That's big news.
Yeah, I'm breaking this to my family too. They had no idea. So I don't really know what the hell you were talking about. Can you say all of that again? It sounded nice. It sounded like that would have been a good thing to live through.
It was. I'm sorry that you missed it. Obviously, you should just be excited now. I've basically summed everything up. There's nothing else. It's new coach.
Are comas okay? Can we make coma jokes, or is that like insensitive? I don't know. I'm not good.
If we can't make coma jokes, I don't know what exactly is on the table.
Sorry if I offended the coma sensitive. That's a great word, by the way. What was your question? I made a coma joke and I forgot. I went into a slight coma and forgot what you had asked me.
So what move do you like the most?
Which move do I like the most? I think overall the move I probably like the most is Marcus Peters, if only because he's still so young. Still has 2 years left on his contract. The asterisk is going to be Brandon Cooks. I think he's got the most upside. And if they can re-sign him to a long-term deal, I think he's got the highest ceiling for what he might be able to do in a Sean McVay offense with Todd Gurley at running back and with Jared Goff at quarterback. I think he might have the best opportunity. But overall, Marcus Peters has proven how productive he is as an aggressive cornerback, and the Rams have been needing somebody like that across from Trumaine Johnson going back to since they lost Janoris Jenkins a couple of years ago.
And so, I guess obviously the questions with Marcus Peters involve why, this is a guy that Washington, took off the team. This is a guy that the Chiefs had that was, arguably their best or one of their best players all around, and especially on defense, a young guy, like you said, with 2 years. And why would teams continuously walk away from this guy? What does that give you for in terms of pause?
It certainly gives me pause, if only because you've got an incredibly young head coach. As great as Sean McVay was last year, he's got 1 year of head coaching experience and not a ton of time in the NFL ranks in general. And secondly, he just hasn't had to deal with this kind of a challenge yet. We talked about it quite a bit on our podcast at Turf Show Times last year, looking towards this draft and the idea, would the Rams be willing to take a guy with those kind of character concerns, with off-field red flags? And part of what made that question so interesting was that they just didn't have anybody like that on the roster last year. And in the course of a single season, they've added a couple guys with some concerns and, let go Alec Ogletree and Robert Quinn, 2 really, really good locker room presence guys that are going to make this a challenge. I think the thing you're probably hoping for as a Rams fan is that Wade Phillips is a guy who has seen everything the NFL has to offer and more. And if there's anybody that can maybe succeed where Andy Reid failed. It's not as if Andy Reid is exactly 30 years old himself. Maybe that, Grandpa Wade is the kind of guy to act as a mitigating influence on Marcus Peters. The other thing is that he's got to keep Talib across from him, and that's a great veteran presence to have as somebody who himself is hardly known as somebody, that's afraid to tangle at cornerback. And so maybe the two of them together can act as a mitigating force on one another and channel the things that make Marcus Peters great and the things that makes him so volatile. If they can channel it towards productive outputs, I think he might be really successful.
And, speaking of Marcus Peters, speaking of Aqib Talib, and speaking of Wade Phillips, you go back to the beginning of 2017, and the only guy starting in the secondary that is still starting in the secondary would be free safety LaMarcus Joyner. John Johnson then took over strong safety. They've added 2 new corners, as we've mentioned, high-profile guys. And even Joyner, that was his first start, at free safety last year. So with all of these new guys and all these new pieces, and with Wade Phillips, and obviously he's one of the most experienced coaches in the NFL, the world. When you look at these 4 new guys, mixed in with, Nickel Roby Coleman or whatever, how do they execute what Wade Phillips wants? How much do you expect that to just come together by week 1? Or, because the Rams had a good pass defense last year. I believe they were 3rd or 2nd in DVOA. So how do they improve?
Well, I think one of the things you got to look at is how they're going to get pressure up front. They didn't have a great natural pass rush last year. A lot of the sacks were just coverage sacks. They couldn't generate consistent pressure without bringing the blitz. That was something that Alec Ogletree was very proficient in, by the way. A great blitzing linebacker, despite his deficiencies as a run defender. But because they've let go of Alec Ogletree as a blitzer, because Robert Quinn just wasn't the same guy that he had been in years past, I'm interested to see what kind of a pass rush they have, because if they're relying on those guys, it's not that I have concerns about the secondary. It's that the pressure on them gets much higher, that they don't have the benefit of an edge rush. What they will have is one of the greatest interior defensive rush combinations that we've seen in the history of football with Ndamukong Suh and Aaron Donald. And, as long as they can stay healthy, it's one of those things where we're already talking about this as Rams fans. The issue is going to be expectations. People are going to go into this season wanting Ndamukong Suh and Aaron Donald to get to the quarterback every single play. They're going to want to see interceptions every other drive. And dealing with those expectations may be a bigger issue than actually, putting it together from a football sense. Wade Phillips is obviously a great tactician defensively, and he'll figure that stuff out. If he could figure out with some other guys, less talented guys, he's going to be able to figure it out on the field with these guys. The bigger issue, I think, is going to be expectations from the fan standpoint, and I don't know really how to address that.
And in focusing on that defensive line, obviously, you've watched Aaron Donald for 4 years, and who else could be, how intimately you could get to know a guy like that, just because he, as the best player on the Rams, is one of the top 3 players in the NFL. You're going to, hear every word he says and watch every moment of every game that he's in. How do you see him meshing with Ndamukong Suh, this first time around, perhaps the only time around, since they both are free agents next year? How do you see them getting together?
I like it when we're talking the intimacy of football and guys and guys meshing together. This is little field goals after dark. I like it. Yeah, I don't see any problems. I mean, it's Aaron Donald. There's no way that you can use him where he's not going to be productive. He's just too damn good. And he's still, young enough where his physical skills aren't anywhere near decline yet. Compared to somebody like Ndamukong Suh, who's a couple years older. The difference was Ndamukong Suh was great last year, great against the run. And I just don't see any problems with it. Again, it's one of those expectations issues. I think that's the harder thing to deal with is, we're going to go into this season expecting those guys to wreck every single down. And it's hard to pull back expectations that are going to be this high this early.
Okay, so we know about those guys, and we know that, with Michael Brockers, another first-round pick, an early first-round pick, they've got those 3 guys in a 4-3 or a 3-4 defense. Talk to me if one of them goes down. Ethan Westbrooks, Dominique Easley, Morgan Fox, Tanzel Smart. What's next, and is there more quality behind them?
Not really. I mean, the Rams got a little bit out of their depth last year, but part of that was just because they were so deep at the back in the secondary. You do have Matt Longacre on the edge. He had a really good season in rotation last year. They're exceptionally high on Samson Ebukam, who was the other side edge rusher in reserve. But up front, right now it's looking like Easley Westbrooks and Tenzel Smart for the most part, maybe a little Morgan Fox. I don't know. The problem really was what got exposed when Brockers went down last year in the playoff game against Atlanta. The depth just wasn't capable of stepping up. I think that's the bigger issue is the Rams are just playing a different class of football now, and it's not about being able to get you through a season. The Rams are going to be expected to get to the playoffs, and barring anything severe, they're probably going to be expected to get beyond the wild card round that they did last year. And should these guys go down, it's going to be imperative that they have depth that can rotate in. Troy Hill did that at cornerback last year. Kayvon Webster, who the Rams just cut, the second cornerback, went down with the Achilles injury in week, I think it was 14, when we played the Philadelphia Eagles. And Troy Hill filled in very well throughout the rest of the season and into the playoffs. That's really going to be the expectation for the depth, and it's definitely a step up that, at this point, I think it's fair to question if the Rams have the right guys there.
So obviously, and one of the things that I sent out a tweet a couple days ago that, I don't know, just got people shared it more than most of my tweets, and it was just the Rams that are going to be free agents next year.
Yep.
And it's just such a phenomenal list of players: Aaron Donald and Ndamukong Suh, Todd Gurley, Marcus Peters, Brandon Cooks, Lamarcus Joyner, Roger Saffold, Rob Havenstein, Jamon Brown, Ethan Westbrook, Dominic Leasy, Matt Longacre. And when you look at those names and everything like that right now, and even to get Suh underneath the cap for next season, they probably still have to make some more moves just to make their current roster be able to fit in there. But then next season, obviously, because so many of these big names are coming off the books or expected to, then you've got a lot of cap space. So it's not a problem of cap space, but with Aaron Donald being, the biggest name, if he goes into free agency, the biggest name perhaps of this century that isn't quarterback, but I'm sure that would never happen because of the franchise tag. What do you expect Aaron Donald to be taken care of before the season?
I hope so. I mean, they had the opportunity to figure it out last year, and they weren't quite at the right place time-wise to feel the pressure to do so. So Aaron Donald held out, if you guys remember, through training camp, through the preseason, and ended his holdout into the regular season. And the Rams actually had him sit out week 1 because he came back so close to the game. Mm-hmm. So they've had plenty of time to work with his representatives. The last word we got was that the Rams have something set away for Donald. They talked about it a little bit yesterday at the Brandon Cooks conference. General Manager Les Snead did. And it sounds like they have everything in place to make it happen. I think part of the question is, if that's the case, why hasn't it happened yet? And the longer it goes on, obviously, the more Rams fans are going to worry. But they're definitely in position to be able to make it happen. The only reason that you could see something extending beyond, that neutral zone of OTAs into, preseason training camp where Rams fans would really, really, really get nervous is something that wouldn't have anything to do with the financials, right? Money-wise, they got plenty of money to re-sign Aaron Donald. But if he wants some kind of a clause in his contract, a lot of people think it's going to have something to do to coincide with the end of the CBA. And the Rams are shaping a lot of their contract negotiations around that timeline. If Aaron Donald signs a contract for, let's say, 6 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road, when we get a new CBA, he may have, cost himself a specific quantity of money that he would have been able to recoup if he waited. And so even if he signs that 6-year deal, he may want a clause in there that the Rams are hesitant about including, or those kind of details. That might be the only thing to hang things up. As a Rams fan, yeah, you want to see this happen well before the season. The Rams are vocal about the idea that they want to get Donald and Brandon Cooks signed their long-term deals before we even get to July and August. So, from our standpoint, we got to hope it happens. I'm sure there are 31 other teams that are hoping that Aaron Donald's an unhappy guy come August, though.
So if moving to the offense, because the Rams weren't just great on defense last year.
We weren't bad. We weren't bad at offense, Kenny.
You weren't bad.
Yay!
You were good. You were first in scoring. It was good. And it wasn't all Zerline, and it wasn't all Hecker. It was the actual guys on offense.
I was going to say, that's how bad it was. That when we talk about our offense, you're talking about the kicker and the punter. Woo!
That's right. That being said, I'm curious too, because when I wrote a week or two ago about the half full, half empty approach to looking at the Rams. and talking about how talented they are, but also like, okay, well, objectively, from another standpoint, what could go wrong? And, every team has a list of what could go wrong. And, one of the interesting things, especially talking long term, is, Andrew Whitworth is the oldest lineman in the NFL.
Yeah.
John Sullivan is, turning 33 this year. And the other three guys on the starting offensive line are free agents next year. It's a really interesting scenario for them where the Rams, in theory, could have the best offensive line in the NFL next season if all things go right and some things go wrong for other teams, perhaps. But then after that, 2019, who knows? And Whitworth, that was one of the things that I discovered in writing that post was a player of his age hasn't started all 16 games at tackle in like 18 years. It just doesn't happen very often and hardly ever. So with that offensive line, like, just what are your general thoughts and what would be your concerns or the player that you would lock in long-term if you could?
Yeah, Rams fans are incredibly concerned about the offensive line. Prior to the Brandon Cooks trade, a lot of people wanted to see the Rams use that 23rd overall pick on an offensive lineman.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the trade went down, people started worrying about the 2019 offensive line with more sincerity. And it's not that Andrew Whitworth didn't play well last year. He did have a good season. It's all the things that you listed and the fact that beyond this year, there's a lot of uncertainty about what that group's going to look like. We've seen what happens when you put a bad offensive line in front of Jared Goff and Todd Gurley. It didn't go well. Now, we can criticize Jeff Fisher all we want, and that's probably fair criticism, but I think you also have to look at some of the personnel that were protecting Goff and what that didn't allow him to do in terms of working downfield versus what we saw in 2017 and the shots that he was able to take with Sammy Watkins and Robert Woods. It changed things quite a bit. And so I think more than anything, Rams fans are really concerned about the long-term viability of that unit, and there's not a lot to rely on. Jamon Brown and Rob Havenstein played well in this last season, but they're the only real certainties given the age of Whitworth, Safford, and Sullivan. And behind them, Austin Blythe played a little bit in reserve center, but beyond him, the Rams don't really have any answers at backup tackle. The guards is another open spot. A lot of people wanted to see the Rams take Will Hernandez, if only because they wanted some certainty at guard moving forward that they don't have. It's one of those things where I don't have a good answer. The Rams don't have a good answer beyond 2018. They're just kind of hoping that this lasts well enough to give them a shot that by the time they get to next year, they can start getting some answers to the questions then.
Yeah. And so the rest of the offense that centers around that, you add Brandon Cooks in there, like we've been talking about, and he goes up with Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. And Tavon Austin's still around. Tyler Higbee, Gerald Everett, lots of weapons and leading into Todd Gurley. And one of the things about running backs is that they don't typically follow up their MVP caliber seasons with more MVP caliber seasons right away for whatever reason, if it's a lot of touches or if it's defense is keying in on them. I mean, does the addition of Brandon Cooks, do you think, help spread that out for Todd Gurley? And that's a big part of the plan right there. How do you expect things to change for Jared Goff with the weapons that he has around him right now and the offense, how it'll be funneled the most efficiently?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue was once Sammy Watkins was gone, the prospect, and similar to before the Rams signed Sammy Watkins a year ago, the prospect of leaving that first wide receiver spot on the depth chart open was one that really, really worried me. And so filling it with Sammy Watkins a year ago made all the sense in the world. And obviously the way the offense performed last year, I don't think many people had many concerns, although they might have wanted to see some more individual production from Watkins. But once he left in free agency, it was the same calculus, right? The Rams needed to get somebody who could hold that position down so that Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp could enjoy the competitive advantages they do by being the second and third wide receivers on the field. I don't think Brandon Cooks is going to lack for a capability to fit in. Sean McVay, obviously tactically, is more than capable of figuring out how to use him. I think that one of the sadder things was that Sean McVay said that what they were looking to do last year was evaluate Tavon Austin as a wide receiver. That made me a little wistful, a tear of sincere caution came to my eye for a guy that finished the season with 13 receptions for 47 yards, Kenny. If you're evaluating him as a wide receiver, I don't know that evaluation is going all that well for a guy in his fifth year. But, that's where the Rams are right now. 3 years ago, Tavon Austin needed to be the guy to catapult the Rams offense out of the bottom quarter of the league. last year he was used almost primarily as a decoy, and he got less than 5 snaps in the playoff game against the Falcons. The Rams have moved on from Tavon Austin. The bigger question with him was why he restructured his deal to stay in Los Angeles. You can look at a ton of offenses where Tavon Austin might have had an opportunity to really, get his career back on track. I don't know that the Rams aren't the worst offense for him to try to do that with right now. So it's a little bit upsetting, but, the addition of Cooks is a great fill-in for Watkins. They just need to replicate what they did offensively last year, and I don't see any reason they can't outside of health being the primary issue there, and then secondly, the age on the offensive line.
You mentioned, a few players that they may be high on, like Samson Abukum, Matt Longacre, maybe looking offensively at guys like maybe Malcolm Brown or Gerald Everett. With all of these changes happening, and identifying maybe some guys that we're not going to talk about because they weren't high-profile additions, maybe that the Seahawks or whatever, any team might be also need to be wary of next season, because there's so much focus on the big names.
Sure.
But there must have also been some guys that you watched last year that I want to see that guy get more opportunities, and it could still happen.
Yeah, it's 2 guys at tight end. You mentioned one of them, who we call young Gerald Everett. I mean, he's one of the most athletic tight ends once he gets the ball that I've seen in a long time, and he proved it last season with some limited opportunities. I think once the offense got going without him, as Tyler Higbee became the primary tight end, I think it was hard to get away from that because they were having so much success. But he's somebody that they've been vocal about, that they want to get involved more. Sean McVay's history in Washington, where he made the most out of his tight ends, especially with Jordan Reed, is something that has Rams fans really excited about the opportunity for Gerald Everett. The other guy would be their 3rd tight end. He got hurt in the preseason last year and missed the whole year. That's Tamarick Hemingway. He was somebody that was flashing some impressive capabilities for a guy that got taken deep in the draft a couple of years ago, that Rams fans were excited to see if McVay could turn him into a more productive component. And because he missed all of 2017, he's coming back with a lot of that kind of potential that people are excited to see that he didn't really get to make good on last year. Offensively, those would be the 2 main guys that I'd point to right now. The other thing is the Rams got a lot of day 3 picks coming up in the draft. We don't have a lot of early draft capital this year, but we got a hell of a lot of picks in the 6th round. There's going to be some guys that fans get excited, the Nelson Spruces of 2018, that are going to come to camp that get Rams fans really excited deep on the offensive depth side.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're a draft guy. Obviously, you come on to 3000 NFL mock draft. You're a guy who follows it very closely. And the Rams' first pick is pick 87, and then they go to pick 111 from the Dolphins. And then they go picks 135 and 136, a pair of picks at the end of the 4th round. And then pick 176, yada, yada, yada. They got a bunch of picks, like you said, later. But with that being said, on day 1 and 2, how tortured are you by the fact that the Rams have almost nothing to do with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be as fun, right? You want to be involved in the draft because it is fun. I think the trade-off is now Rams football's fun. And so before it was, oh man, the draft is great. And then you get to week 1, it's like, good Lord, I hate football. Now I love football, and the draft's not as fun, and the mock drafts aren't as interesting. But that's a trade-off I'll probably take every day. The interesting thing is just going to be how the draft develops when you're in that position. You have to wait to see how the draft gets to you. I wrote a piece today about the 5 hinges in front of the Rams at 87 and trying to figure out how that draft is going to get put together over the first 2.5 rounds as the Rams get ready to approach it. It's going to be an interesting couple of days, man.
Yeah, and you're also a level-headed guy. You compliment to your credit. I think whenever we have discussions, it's very, I think, objective, and we seem to be able to agree on things and disagree on things without team bias. And in that vein, like in terms of quote unquote going for it, a lot of people say the Rams are going for it right now, that they've pushed everything into 2018 because after 2019 they're not going to have the draft picks from this year. You're not going to have gonna have to lose a couple big name free agents, whatever. A lot of things going into right now. And I just, in general, like, do you agree with that notion? Do you agree that that's what they're doing, or that they are clearly like going for something right now with all the players that'll be leaving and all that kind of stuff? Do you agree with that? And if they are doing that, if you think that they are doing that, do you agree with the decision to do that? Or do you think they should have had a longer term objective?
I think there's an aspect of that that's true. That, especially when you look at Ndamukong Suh, he's somebody that I'd feel close to 98% sure that he's gone next year and is somewhere else in 2019. But I think the difference is to the degree that they're going for it in 2018, they're only allowed to do that because they've got Jared Goff, Todd Gurley, Aaron Donald, John Johnson, so many of these quality players that are on rookie deals. And so the idea that they're going for it now, I undercut that only to the degree that there's no reason those guys shouldn't be there next year and beyond. And if you've got a core that you're relying upon, really all you're doing with some of these higher profile moves is putting guys around that core. And if Aqib Talib's going to be here, and if Marcus Peters is going to be here for 2 years, and if they can re-sign Brandon Cooks, then the degree that they're really quote unquote going for it this year really only holds up with Ndamukong Suh. And I don't know that that's necessarily going all in. It comes down to contract renegotiations. We have to see what happens with Aaron Donald, Brandon Cooks, and maybe LaMarcus Joyner. But I feel pretty good about the idea that they've got something that, even to the degree that they are going all in, doesn't leave the cupboard completely barren beyond 2018. In terms of whether or not I agree with the aggression of using draft picks and the insurance that they give you in the future, which is obviously what we're enjoying right now, given how we've drafted the last 5 years or so. I think it's going to come down to results. If the Rams go to the Super Bowl, or if they win a Super Bowl, it validates that aggression. And as much as some fans, there's a lot of Rams fans that wanted them to be able to invest in their future with some of these premium draft picks, there's not a single Rams fan that's going to be critical of them if they win a Super Bowl, and probably not if they get to a Super Bowl. So it really comes down to performance, and if they can get that out of it, even if there's something like the Brandon Cooks trade, if for whatever reason they're not able to re-sign him, if the Rams get to the Super Bowl, and part of the reason why is because Brandon Cooks has a couple performances in the postseason, I don't know that that's something not worth spending a first-round pick to be able to achieve, especially given where the Rams have come from and the opportunity that's in front of them. So I guess it kind of depends on what happens this year, and maybe even to a degree in 2019. But there's no doubt that they've been aggressive in trying to take advantage of this window. I think it's a luxury that they've afforded themselves to be able to do that just by drafting well in a couple of years prior.
And I'm just curious, too, from an outsider's perspective, the Seahawks have also made a lot of moves, or made some big moves, losing Richard Sherman, Michael Bennett, Sheldon Richardson, Jimmy Graham, lots of changes, Paul Richardson, lots of guys going out. And from your outsider's perspective, seeing that, where do you put the Seahawks right now? Because they were 9-7 a year ago. They've still got Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll, Bobby Wagner, Earl Thomas, still stuff going on there. But right now, what's your order for the NFC West, or what do you think of the Seahawks? It's
interesting. I think the draft is going to be really, really, really key for you guys on the 49ers. I'm eager to see those games next year. I'm sure you guys are too. It's one of those things where Russell Wilson's only played 6 seasons, so you guys are going. That's almost like chapter 1 of his career. Chapter 2 is yet to be determined. I don't think that's a bad thing for you guys. I know there's I sense a bit of panic from Seahawks fan. Is that fair to say that there's a degree of panic? Is that an appropriate term to use?
I don't know if the word would be panic as much as like just depletion. Like they're just people are maybe deflated. They're like, oh, well, the Seahawks aren't going to do it this year. And so, yeah, more so than maybe panic is just like feeling defeated already.
I guess, and here's the thing: you guys are coming off of a peak, right? I mean, you won 13 games in a Super Bowl, 5 years ago? You guys have won double-digit games for the last 5 years. I think it's fair to get deflated from that every now and then. You can't. That's not sustainable for 15 years. I think the question is, you guys have a challenge in front of you that you haven't had maybe since back in the Holmgren days, or at least the early Pete Carroll days. How do you guys want to build this next chapter of Seahawks football? I just think it's not defined yet, and the fact that it's not defined doesn't mean that the definition is going to ultimately be a bad thing. I just think it's a question that you guys have to answer. Maybe not this season. That may be, given what you guys are coming off of, and the age at which some of these guys are approaching, maybe you guys need another offseason, the 2018 and 2019 offseason, to be able to address that. But just because you guys don't have that question answered doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a bad answer. So I don't think there's necessarily reason for negativity. I can feel the idea of apprehension being fair, sure, because that's a question that's going to need to get answered, and until it does, there's a fork in the road for you guys, and I'm sure you guys are hoping for the higher road when you get to that fork.
Is there a, I don't know exactly how he played last year in total or the last few years. I mean, it seems fairly good, but in general, is there a high-priced player on the Rams roster, someone that if he wasn't there, you could fit Robert Quinn back onto the team? Is there anyone that you would rather trade out Robert Quinn for?
Maybe Mark Barron. I mean, he's been really good in run support, and especially next to Alec Ogletree, who was required because of the deficiency that Ogletree had in the run game. But you're talking about one of the most expensive inside linebackers in the game, and at a position, I know you and I talk about the running back position a lot. Mm-hmm. The inside linebacker position is just not a premium one. And so when you're paying a premium at a non-premium position, sometimes that kind of inhibits what you're able to do at premium positions like the edge, where the Rams just don't have premium talents there right now. That would be one I'd point to. The other one, and this is going to be one of those difficult decisions, is maybe LaMarcus Joyner. I love him. I think he's a great player. I think he was 57th in Pro Football Focus's top 100 players in the NFL last year. Mm-hmm. But the Rams are loaded on defense. When you've got, let's get beyond 2018, assuming Ndamukong Suh's not there. If you've got Aaron Donald, Michael Brockers, John Johnson, Aqib Talib, Marcus Peters, I don't know that somebody like LaMarcus Joyner is a necessary component. And the Rams have shown a proclivity for letting high-priced guys in their secondary go elsewhere for long-term contracts. They've done it with Trumaine Johnson. They've done it with Janoris Jenkins. They did it with Rodney McLeod, and they did it with T.J. McDonald. All four of those guys ended up getting long-term contracts for top money somewhere else, and they've been able to fill those positions with plenty of talent. So I don't know that I wouldn't feel uncomfortable, as good as Joyner was. I don't know that I'd feel uncomfortable about them letting him go and trying to find somebody who can fill that spot in at a lower cost that would give them some cap flexibility to bring in more edge talent, whether that's Robert Quinn or somebody else, because there's a good chance that that's the top need on the roster going into 2019.
Finally, let me give you an opportunity to be excited about the draft, because I know how much you love it and you want to follow it. This isn't a year that's perhaps as interesting as any year. It's very, we rarely see this many quarterback prospects stacked at the top that it looks like it could go down that way. We have the Browns with 2 picks in the top 4. We have trades already happening between the Jets and the Colts and the Bills and so on and so forth. With all these quarterbacks going around as top prospects, who is your guy that you think is like, hey, if the Browns are smart, this is the guy that they'll take? And maybe is there just like sort of maybe a surprise that you see potentially happening in the top 5, top 10?
Oh, sure. I'll give you 2 words. One name to remember there, Kenny. Mitchell Trubisky. I've never seen it before. Nobody's ever drafted a guy 1 year after he's already been drafted and playing for a team. It's unconventional, but that's what the Cleveland Browns probably like, is the unconventionality. Ooh. Hey, no, I don't know. Oh, hold on. See, Mitchell Trubisky makes me cough every time I say his name. Mm-hmm. It's one of those. It's like a Candyman, and then Mitchell Trubisky appears in the dark in your bathroom. I don't know what's going to happen at the top of this draft. The number 4 pick is the one that confuses me, because you got to assume Cleveland goes out and gets a quarterback at number 1 overall. I like Saquon, but I'm sure you and I agree that he doesn't make a ton of sense at number 4, right?
Yeah, for sure. Please don't. I mean, like, they're going to do it or someone's going to do it, but yeah, it's bad.
And so I wonder, the 3 scenarios that I laid out today in the piece I wrote at Tertial Times is either they draft Saquon, which I guess, but that's got its own risk, or they trade out, which I could certainly see happening, or number 3, they pick somebody else from the field, Bradley Chubb, Quentin Nelson, whomever. They got a ton of options of who they could trade. That number 4 pick, I think, is the first hinge for how things go. The other one, I know you mentioned top 10, would be the 10th pick of the Oakland Raiders, because if you look after them, you got Miami, Buffalo, and then down at 15, Arizona, all 3 of whom could be, and certainly for Buffalo and Arizona, need a quarterback. Mm-hmm. And obviously, as NFC West fans, that could be something that affects us. If Lamar Jackson is going to be gone by 11 to Miami, does Arizona need to hop them to have a chance at him at number 10 overall? That's one that I'm interested in. How do you feel about Lamar Jackson in the NFC West?
I like it. I think I like him as a player. I'm not an expert at all on prospects and stuff. I have guys that I lean towards if I watch them and I say, that's cool. I want to see more of that. But I think there's just so many unknowns anyway that it's like, hey, you just pick guys you like and maybe they'll be just don't be one of these people that says like, oh, if Mitchell Trubisky is not an MVP, I'll eat my shirt and my hat and la. And like, I don't know, who knows? But I think if you're in Arizona or Buffalo or whatever, if the best quarterback that everyone says is left on the board is Lamar Jackson, and that's the thing. To me, it's just you got to maybe take a shot. I mean, Arizona for sure. It's like they got to have a quarterback, especially in the NFC where there's like 13 or 14 quote unquote franchise quarterbacks already in place. I think you got to take one. So if Lamar Jackson is going to the NFC, him in Arizona, I would rather have, I would definitely rather them stick with, Sam Bradford and Mike Lennon than that. So, and I think I've mentioned for the Seahawks, like I think the Seahawks are looking at quarterbacks all the time, first round, second round. I don't think that they've ever settled on one that they believe is right for their pick. Up until, the only quarterback that John Schneider has drafted is Russell Wilson, but John Schneider was the assistant in Green Bay when they took Aaron Rodgers. So I believe that they are always looking. Last year they were looking at Pat Mahomes. This year they're looking at Josh Allen. Like, I believe they're always looking. And if Lamar Jackson is a guy that they think is capable, especially knowing that you have a quarterback in place for the next 2 years, that you can just say, well, let's bring this guy in. Especially, it may be a scenario where you're keeping him out of another team or you're using him as a trade in 3 years. Like, the Patriots didn't do anything with Jimmy Garoppolo. They had a quality backup for 3 years, and then they upgraded their pick from like 62 to 38 or whatever. So there's nothing wrong to me to take one. And if he's going to I think if he was going to the NFC a year or two down the line, it's the same thing with Deshaun Watson. Again, I don't know anything, but I did just watch Deshaun Watson. I looked at all of the things he did in college. I said, fuck, if that guy can get it done that many times, I believe he might be able to get it done in the NFL. And, he had a good rookie season. So that's kind of the way I feel about Lamar Jackson, even though I think from things that I understand with regards to a floor and a ceiling for a floor for what you'll accept for completion percentage, he's really like close to not hitting that. And that's a little bit of a concern. But I think going through what he's gone through and being able to do what he's done and taking a team like Louisville this is a basketball school that he made into a championship contender and obviously a Heisman winner. There's a lot of things going on there. Maybe he never plays in the NFL as a quarterback, but I would say that, if you're Arizona, like I would take a quarterback over so many other positions if you need one.
Well, look, man, if you guys need a quarterback, you got the 18th overall pick. There's a specific Pacific coaster that we have on the roster that I don't know if you've noticed, we're up to making trades. Sean the Grand Canyon Mannion. Hey,
I'm just seriously, how fascinating is it that like after Russell Wilson, as a third round pick, like did we think about him and we think like, oh, he was a third round pick. Like that's not seventh round, that's third round. And then you just look around and it's like Garrett Grayson, Sean Mannion. There are people picked in the second and third round, Christian Hackenberg, that literally do not have a shot of ever playing in this league at a legitimate level. And it's like how quickly day two picks at quarterback. I mean, day one picks too, and obviously, but it's just fascinating to me how quickly like the Seahawks drafted Russell Wilson with it in mind to him either be, I guess, with the thought that this guy can win the job, because obviously he did. Like they signed Matt Flynn, but like they drafted Russell Wilson with the thought in mind, like I think this guy can start. And then like guys like Sean Mannion and Garrett Grayson, like Sean Mannion, especially being in the position he was in with St. Louis, to like have some sort of an impact because they didn't have much going on before they drafted Jared Goff. Like they drafted Sean Mannion, and then the next year it's like they traded everything for Jared Goff. So it's just fascinating to me how unusual Russell Wilson is and how normal it is. And we kind of just forget about these quarterbacks like Sean Mannion that were third round picks, which now feels like, hey, you draft a guy in a third round. He must be something because there are like you can get all-pro running back in the 3rd round, and it's not even a big deal. So to take a quarterback at that level, obviously you think there's something to develop, but man, it's just so fascinating to me how quickly Sean Mannion and guys like that just sort of become afterthoughts. And it's like, well, this guy is going to be a career Derek Anderson or something like that. But I don't know how you feel about Sean Mannion, but that's always what I think about first is, do people even remember that Sean Mannion's in the NFL?
Sean's parents do. I will say this, though. You convinced me. We will now take number 18 as well as number 120. Okay, good making business deals with you, Kenny. The one thing I say, you were talking about day 2 quarterbacks. Another one of those hinges that I have is a guy like Mason Rudolph, right? Where everybody's talked about, Baker Mayfield, Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, Lamar Jackson. Not a lot of people have talked about Mason Rudolph, and that's somebody. I get the idea that you've had all these other day 2 quarterbacks. Mason Rudolph might not even be a day 2 quarterback, but we talked about all these day 2 quarterbacks that have flamed out. He's somebody that I could totally see. I don't know how much difference there is between Mason Rudolph and Josh Allen, and if we're talking about day 2 quarterback privilege and how somehow that's applied to Josh Allen in the 1st round. I don't know that Mason Rudolph is all that different in somebody that can't be somebody, like you said, that other teams need to fall in love with. Obviously, for you guys and for us, we don't need him as a quarterback 1, but for other teams that do, I could totally see it. And you look at the top of that 2nd round, Kenny, I know you guys aren't involved because who did you guys give your 2nd rounder to?
That was Sheldon Richardson.
The Sheldon Richardson deal with the Jets, that's right. You look at after those first 5 picks, because you got the Cleveland Browns with the 1st and 3rd. You got Colts with the 4th and the 5th. They're already going to be invested at the top of the 1st round. So are the Giants. I don't know how much they need from those early 2nd round picks. It's going to be nuts, man. This draft is going to be a hell of a lot of fun, even though you and I are going to be going into Friday night, that 2nd round, not looking at anything happening for the first hour or two. It's still going to be really, really interesting to see how things shake out.
Yeah, for sure. And since we have talked a lot about the draft in the past and the same things, and we've touched on the running back philosophy a few times. When I bring up, do not draft a running back in the 1st round, don't take one, especially in the top 15. Every time that I say that, that people bring up certain names, and right now the top of that list is Todd Gurley because 10th overall pick, all pro, all these kinds of things. With that being said, you agreed with me at the time that Todd Gurley at 10 was perhaps not the best choice that the Rams could have made. After being, after 3 years of watching Todd Gurley, from the ups of his rookie season to the downs of his 2nd season, to how much he could excel with Sean McVay, where do you stand right now on the selection of Todd Gurley at number 10?
I've been clear on this with Rams fans to a very uncomfortable degree, so it may shock Seahawks fans to hear a Rams fan say this. It remains a horrible pick.
Yes.
It made no sense at the time. And given what happened his first 2 years in the league, only validated the reasons why. The fact that the Rams were able to get a capable head coach, a capable left tackle, 3 capable passing targets, all in one offseason last year, which made it possible for Todd Gurley to have the season he did, is not something you could have predicted when you drafted him in 2015, right? You draft based on the way things look now, based on the outlook now. You're not drafting guys in 2018 if you're the Jets saying, well, in 2020 we'll have a new head coach, we'll have a capable left tackle, you can't do that. You have to draft based on where you are and where you think you're going with some sincerity. And based on where the Rams were in 2015 and how they were shaping up, they did not need to spend a 5th pick on a running back in 4 years. They had already drafted 4 running backs in 3 years under Jeff Fisher. They didn't need a 5th one. And the fact that they drafted him, and A, the offense got worse in 2015, B, the offense got worse in 2016, and C, both seasons overall, even though he won Rookie of the Year, he won Rookie of the Year for his first 4 games, not for his performance on the season. If you look after those first 4 games, his season was really not all that great. His 2016 season obviously was much worse, ran for less than 60 yards a game. That's not necessarily his fault, right? That's the limitations of the position, which is exactly why if you're the Rams in 2015 needing an offensive line, needing wide receivers, and if you're still really trying to run Fisher ball, needing some talent on the defensive side, those are all valid reasons why not to take another running back.
So what's going to stand between like how conflicted are you going to be, if at all, with contract negotiations for Todd Gurley in the future?
I've said it. The Rams would be best served making a fair offer on the market. I think the problem is what you're seeing with Le'Veon Bell in Pittsburgh, right? Le'Veon Bell and Todd Gurley are one of the two, if not the two best running backs in terms of pure talent in the NFL. And I could see both of them struggling to sign long-term deals with their team because teams don't want to pay for running backs. What you just said, you can wait until the third round of any given year and get very capable talent at the running back position that even if you go from Todd Gurley to a rookie running back, and I argue with Rams fans about the logic of this, if Sean McVay's offensive system is so good and the offensive line is so good and the passing targets are so good, you don't need a great running back in the first place, right? So any deficiency between what Todd Gurley does and what you can get for replacement at value for the position is not going to harm you as much as paying an exorbitant amount for a position that doesn't demand as much given the market.
Yeah. Well, that is.
So I'm looking forward to Todd Gurley, Seattle Seahawks running back.
Oh, no.
15 mil a year. Great investment, guys.
Absolutely not. I'd be fascinated to see, because there are 7 or 8 running backs that could go before the Rams even pick. I mean, there's going to be more than that. I mean, there's going to be a lot going this year early, especially in that second round. And it'd be interesting. I don't know. I mean, are the Rams a possibility for a running back at pick 87?
Not necessarily. Well, normally I would say yes. The problem is that's their first pick. If they had the 23rd pick and if they had the 55th pick, then I could totally get on board with a running back at 87. Remember, the Rams signed Lance Dunbar a year ago in free agency. He was supposed to be the guy that was able to spell Todd Gurley, especially in passing situations. He got hurt in the preseason, and that opened up Todd Gurley for those passing situations, which he excelled in the first place in 2017. You go back to the Jeff Fisher years when we had Benny Cunningham. He was the guy that got used a lot in those passing situations. So it wasn't until this year, only because of that Lance Dunbar injury, that the Rams found out they maybe didn't need a second guy all that much for Todd Gurley. That may have been something that Todd Gurley played his way above, but I don't know that if you're looking at how to build the roster that you don't feel all that uncomfortable about taking a mid-round running back to pair with him moving forward.
Joe McAtee, where can people follow you on Twitter?
Follow Tertial Times. Y'all don't want to follow me on my personal account, man. I talk about appetizers and socks. Guys named Akram Wadley. If your last name is Wadley, I'm going to be a fan. I don't even care. It just the Wadley. There's something very, what was it? Jamarix and Lamar or whatever from the Key and Peele. Wadley is one of those names that just falls right into the Jasper Probing Cux III that makes me very comfortable. Follow me at Tertial Times, not 3K underscore.
You got a early favorite for appetizer of the year?
Appetizer. See, now that's something we should have discussed. We can do. I could do 2 hours of podcasting on appetizer of the year. I think fried is coming back in vogue. I think it's going to be those unexpected frieds, like a fried pickle, not like the fried cheese or fried chicken. I think those things have had their moment. They've come and gone. I'm interested to see the new fry. I saw, what was it the other day? A hot dog inside a pickle that got fried. I'm interested in that. Now you have to remember, I'm from Texas. My family's Louisiana. I was born deep fried. I just came out all crispy and ready to go right out of my mouth. Ooh, that boy brown already. So I'm used to the idea of fried. I don't know that fried is going to take off in the Pacific Northwest that it might in Mississippi.
Yeah. No doubt, no questions. Come on. That's it for this episode of Seahawks Chats. You've heard, all about the Rams all offseason, and now you've heard some thoughts here from Turf Show Times on those Rams moves. And certainly, I think, make no doubt, I say stuff on Twitter and about the Rams or something like me. It's like, you're salty. I don't have anything to be salty about. I don't care.
You're a salty St. Louis fan, Kenny. You're just not over the
St. Louis boy. I'm a salty boy.
Over the move.
But there's nothing to be salty about. I don't have. People think that I have some sort of what am I supposed to be bitter that the Rams made good moves and added to their talent? I don't care. It has nothing to do with me. I will objectively talk about it sometimes. And so that's it. And so now we've gotten some other thoughts there objectively from Joe McAtee, and that's it. Then this is this episode of Seahawks Chats. And if you want to listen to more, this isn't confusing. Subscribe to Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur for more chats about the Seahawks, the Rams, appetizers, whatever it may be. And that comes out periodically, roughly once a week, and sometimes 3,000 NFL mock draft. And perhaps when the draft comes around, we will hear from Joe again. That is it for this episode, and we'll come back next time.